Welcome to Adobe Illustrator CS6 Fundamentals. In this course, we're going to be taking a look at Adobe's premier vector-based drawing application, Illustrator. When you create artwork in Illustrator, it's infinitely scalable because it's based on vectors. We're going to be taking a look at the basics of the program in this course to get you comfortable so you can start creating your own artwork. Adobe Illustrator is used by a wide variety of professionals, from print, web, and mobile designers. You'll find that you'll create artwork in Illustrator and use it in other Creative Suite applications. It's not uncommon to take content created in Illustrator and use it for titling sequences in After Effects or Premiere. You'll integrate your artwork that you create in Illustrator and bring it over to Photoshop. It's not uncommon to create content in Illustrator and animate it for the web in Adobe Flash. Additionally, if you are a web designer, there's a great possibility you want to use Illustrator to mock up content before coding it. With that being said, throughout this course, we're going to be taking a look at the fundamentals of the program so you can start using Illustrator effectively in your work. Before we get started inside of Illustrator, I want to review the differences between vector-based artwork and bitmap-based artwork. You'll notice I'm working with a document called Vectors vs. Pixels.ai. Now this file is available to you inside the Chapter 1 folder of the Class Exercise Files folder. If you have access to our website, on the class page, you'll notice that there's an Exercise Files tab. If you go ahead and click on it, you'll then see a link called Course Files. Go ahead and click it. It'll download the exercise files, place them on your desktop so they're in a nice central location. Additionally, as we work inside of Illustrator, we're going to be working with different pieces of artwork and graphics. I just want to point out that a lot of this content is courtesy of my friends at Shutterstock.com. They were nice enough to allow me to use their library of content for examples throughout this course. So if you have a need for not only stock photography, but stock artwork, Shutterstock.com is a great resource. So coming back into Illustrator, we have these two pieces of artwork. One is vector-based, one is bitmap-based. Vector graphics are created with vector points, and those points are connected mathematically. Because they're connected mathematically, the end result is nice, crisp edges all over the artwork. This gives you the ability to take this logo and put it on something as small as a business card or something as large as a billboard without having to worry about quality degradation. That's not the case with bitmap-based images. Bitmap-based images are constructed of little squares of color information called pixels. Bitmap images traditionally lend themselves to images with great tonal range, like photographs. The limitation there, however, is you're limited to the amount of pixels that are currently within that image. If you have to increase the size of the image, the pixels spread out, the computer has to come up with new pixel information to fill those holes, and the end result is an image of lower quality. With a vector image, you're just changing the vector points' locations, and then you're recalculating how to connect them. Additionally, the way that you work inside of Illustrator is very different than a program like Photoshop. If you wanted to change the color of an element inside of Photoshop, you have to select those pixels. Well, that's not the case inside of Illustrator. Illustrator is object-based, so if you wanted to change the color of, say, this text, you could simply click it and change the color. We'll take a look at that in just a second, but if we go ahead and zoom in to these images, the image on the right, you'll notice immediately begins to lose quality, and this is the bitmap version. Additionally, because it's based on pixels, which are squares, you'll notice it has a lot of trouble creating curves. But if we look at the vector version, everything is nice and crisp. Like I was saying earlier, Illustrator is object-based, so if we decided we wanted to change the color of this text, all we would have to do is select the text, come up to the options bar, and choose a different color. And you'll notice that the text is immediately updated. Again, in the bitmap version, you'd have to make a selection of all the pixels within that text and then change the color. But of course, it's not that easy because as you see, bitmap images create transition pixels between the foreground color and the background color. That complicates making a selection to change its color because you have those intermediate pixels. So hopefully that brief explanation gives you some idea as to the differences between vector images and bitmap images. It's not to say that vector images are superior in every application. They're definitely not. But you can see they definitely have their advantages in certain situations over their bitmap counterparts. Now that we have a clear understanding about the differences between vector-based artwork and bitmap-based artwork, we can begin talking about another fundamental concept inside of Illustrator called paths. Paths are critically important to understand because all of your artwork inside of Illustrator will be based on paths. I'm working with a document called paths.ai, which is available inside the Chapter 1 folder. You'll notice that I have the Direct Selection tool highlighted. The Direct Selection tool is the white arrow tool located in the top right-hand corner of the Tools panel. So what we have here are 4 different paths. Up here towards the top, we have 2 open paths because they don't create a shape. Then down below, we have 2 closed paths because they do create shapes. So what we want to take a look at are how these paths are created. If we take a look at the straight line up here in the top left-hand corner, this straight diagonal line, I suppose, you'll notice that it consists of 2 anchor points, and you can mouse over the ends of the line to see those anchor points. Additionally, Illustrator will tell you its precise XY coordinate. So we have an anchor point here, and then we have an anchor point up here towards the top. Now, if you go ahead and click on this anchor point, you'll select it. When you select it, in this case, it becomes highlighted. Now, what we have here is something called a corner anchor point. It's a corner anchor point because it draws a straight line from the center of the anchor point to its destination, which is this anchor point. If we take a look at this curved line, it too has 2 anchor points. The difference is, however, when you click on this anchor point, we have this control arm that appears. This control arm dictates the direction of the path from that anchor point. This anchor point, however, is referred to as a smooth anchor point because you have the ability now to create smooth paths. So these are the 2 open paths. What about these 2 closed paths down here towards the bottom? Well, the rectangle consists of 4 corner points. If you click in the corner, you'll see the anchor point, and it simply draws a straight line from this anchor point to this anchor point. And it continues to do that until you have a closed path, which results in this rectangle. Believe it or not, this oval also contains 4 anchor points. However, the 4 anchor points used in this shape are smooth anchor points because we're controlling the direction and creating arcs between one anchor point to the other. So it's a fairly straightforward concept if you want to think about paths and how they work. But ultimately, what you need to take away from this movie is that there's 2 types of paths. There's open paths and closed paths, which are somewhat self-explanatory. But then there's also 2 different behaviors when it comes to anchor points. We have corner anchor points, which draws straight lines from the center of the anchor point. And then we have smooth anchor points. And the key with the smooth anchor point is it has a control arm. And that control arm will ultimately control the direction of the path. Before I go into the nuts and bolts of the Illustrator interface, I just want to give you some basic concepts and skills so you can start using Illustrator right away. At this point, we understand the differences between bitmap and vector artwork, and we also understand the concept of paths inside of Illustrator. I'm working with a document called fillinstroke.ai, which is available inside the Chapter 1 folder. It's essentially the same document that we were working with in the last movie, so if you have that document open, really there's no need to open this document. But what we want to talk about here is how fills and strokes work inside of Illustrator. So what I'm going to do is come over here and highlight the selection tool. With the selection tool highlighted, if you click on one of these open paths that we were talking about in the last movie, when you select it, if you take a look at the control panel up here towards the top, we can see that we have a black stroke applied to this path. If we open this up, you'll notice that there's all sorts of different color options, but over here to the top left-hand corner, there's an option called None. If you go ahead and select that, once you select it, it looks like the path disappears. And for most purposes, it does. You don't see it on screen. If you were to print this, there's really nothing to print, but that doesn't mean that the path doesn't exist. It does. There's still the anchor points, and they're still connected together. If you hover around this empty space, eventually you'll find your path. If you're having trouble finding the path, you can always click and drag a marquee around the general area, and it will select that path. So you can have a path with no style. So obviously, if you create a path, you want to apply some type of style to it. So with it selected, again, in the control panel, you can come over here and choose whatever color you want. So if I go ahead and select this blue, you'll notice that the path is now stroked with that blue. Additionally, there are some other appearance options, and they're located up here towards the top in the control panel. Right now, we have the stroke weight, which is essentially the thickness. You can access this drop-down menu, and you can choose a different point size. If you go ahead and select something like 7, you'll notice it becomes a lot thicker. And there's some additional options here. For example, we have the variable width profile, and these are things that we'll get into a little bit later on. But you can go ahead and select one, and it changes the appearance of the stroke on the path. This looks a little bit more like a brush stroke. There's also this drop-down menu, which allows you to change the definition of the brush. So you have a lot of options in terms of the appearance of a particular path. Again, we can come over here and select this open path, and if we want, we can change the thickness, we can change the color. You have all these options available to you for modifying the appearance of the path. So it's important to understand that the path is inherently separate from the appearance. We can come over here and select one of our closed paths, and with one of these selected, again, you have all the same options for changing the appearance of the path. You can change the color, you can change the weight, all those options are available to you. But because it's a closed path, you have the additional option of changing the fill. The fill is the interior color of the shape. You'll notice next to the stroke inkwell, there's also a fill inkwell. If you click that, it'll open up that same swatches panel. You can go ahead and choose a color. Or if you want, you can choose one of these radial gradients or linear gradients. You can even choose one of these patterns. So there's a lot of options here in terms of changing the appearance of either an open or closed path. Again, we can come over here and select this oval. With the oval, you can change the appearance of the stroke, and you can also change the appearance of the fill. So there's a lot to this in terms of really controlling the appearance of your objects, but that's the basics, and that'll get you pretty far inside of Illustrator. The key concept here is to remember that a path is separate from its appearance. So you can have a path, but you won't see it in print or on screen until you apply some type of an appearance to it through either stroke properties or fill properties. In this movie, what I want to take a look at is exactly how you can go about selecting content inside of Illustrator. We were exposed to that a little bit in the last movie, but I want to elaborate on that in this movie. You'll notice I'm working with a document called selections.ai, which is available inside the Chapter 1 folder. Here we have 3 different cars in 3 different boxes. What we want to do is understand exactly what happens when you make a selection with the black arrow tool, which is referred to as the selection tool, or the direct selection tool, which is the white arrow. So what we want to do is look at all of these objects, and if you mouse over these objects with the selection tool, or the direct selection tool for that matter, you get outlines of its different parts. In this case, where we're looking at the car is comprised of several different parts, and you can verify that by mousing over it. Now, when you create an illustration like this, it's not uncommon to want to move all of these elements together. So oftentimes what you do after creating all this content is you select it all and you group it. So all of these individual elements are now part of a larger group. What that gives you the ability to do with the selection tool is click on the car and have the car be treated as one element. At this point, if you click and drag, you can simply move the car to a different location. However, you will run into situations where you need to select a certain aspect of the car. One way to do that is with the direct selection tool, which is, of course, the white arrow. With the direct selection tool, if you mouse over the car, you can see its different parts and individual anchor points. Now, what's interesting about the direct selection tool is if you're not hovering over a specific anchor point and you click, you'll select that entire path, the whole object of that path. At that point, if you wanted to move it, you could click and drag, and you'll notice I removed that part of the car. I'm going to go ahead and undo that, Command-Z or Control-Z on Windows. Something else that's interesting when you're working with the selection tools is you can easily toggle between the selection tools. All you have to do is hold down the Command key. It would be the Control key on Windows. Notice right now, the direct selection tool is the active tool. If I hold down the Command key here on the Mac, it turns into the black arrow, meaning if I come over and click somewhere on the car, I'll select the entire object. So that's one way of creating a selection. Of course, in the last movie, I showed you how you could click and drag a marquee around some content to select it. You can also select individual anchor points. Again, we saw this in the last movie. All you have to do is hover over one of the anchor points and click. So now the difference is only this anchor point is selected. Opposed to clicking somewhere outside of an anchor point, you'll select the entire path, the entire object of that path. The difference is when you click on the anchor point, you're selecting just that anchor point. So in this case, if I use the arrow keys on the keyboard, I'm just going to move that one anchor point. I'll go ahead and undo that. Something else that's important to understand when you're working with objects inside of Illustrator is that there's a stacking order associated with these objects. So right now we have 6 objects within the document. Each of these objects has its own level within the stacking order. One way to look at the stacking order is to take a look at the Layers panel. The Layers panel is available over here on the right-hand side. If you don't see this little icon, you can always go to the Window menu, and under the Window menu, you can choose Layers. So here inside the Layers panel, we can see we only have one layer. But because we have multiple objects within this layer, there's a stacking order associated with this layer. And if you expand this little triangle, you'll see that we have the 3 paths, which are those squares. Then we have the 3 groups, which are the cars. You can further expand a car to see all of the individual elements that make up that car. So right now we can see that the blue square is the topmost sublayer. Then we have this red square, and then we have the yellow square. What that means is if I come over here and select the red square, notice I'm using the selection tool. If I click and drag and place this on top of the yellow square, it appears on top of the yellow square. Likewise, if I come over here and select this blue square and I click and drag, it will appear on top of both the yellow square and the red square. I'll go ahead and move the yellow square over a little bit. I'm just using the arrow keys on the keyboard to move it. I'm going to hold down the Shift key while using the arrow keys, and you move it in larger increments. So now, if we wanted to change the stacking order, we have a couple different options. One option is to come over here to the Layers panel, select the particular sublayer, and just click and drag it above the other sublayers. Now you'll notice that this object appears on top of the other boxes. Additionally, you can come up to the Object menu, and under the Object menu, you can choose Arrange, and you have several different options. In this case, if we choose Send Backwards, what it will do is send it backwards one step within the sublayers. So it will appear behind the blue sublayer, or the blue box on the document, but above the red box. And you can see that that's the case. Whereas if we come up to the Object menu, and we choose Arrange and choose Send to Back, it becomes the bottommost sublayer. So now it's underneath not only the other two squares, but also all of the cars. So understanding how you can select objects obviously is very important inside of Illustrator. Additionally, you have to be aware of the stacking order when you're working with multiple objects inside the program. Continuing with our discussion about selections, I want to point out something called isolation mode inside of Illustrator. I'm working with a document called isolation.ai, which is available in the Chapter 1 folder. So in the last movie, we essentially learned that you can select an object with the selection tool, but you can select individual components with the direct selection tool. And if we take a look at this logo, we can see that it's made up of several different parts. And like the last movie, where we were looking at the cars, because it's made up of several different parts, the artist grouped all of those parts together. Under the Object menu, you'll notice that there's a Group command. All you have to do is have several different objects. So in this case, I'm drawing out a couple different shapes. With each of these shapes selected, so in this case, all three shapes, you would just come up to the Object menu, and from there you would choose Group. When you group them together, no matter which one of these shapes you select, you're essentially selecting all three. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. But what I want to point out, like I said, is something called isolation mode. You'll notice right now I have the selection tool highlighted. Let's say we wanted to select these mountains. We know if we click once, we're just selecting the grouped object. However, if we double-click, when we double-click, we enter into isolation mode. At this point, you can see that we're inside the group. So what does that mean? Well, again, I still have the selection tool highlighted, but you'll notice I can select individual components of this piece of artwork. But what I'm interested in doing is changing a particular component. Let's say these mountains. Well, with these mountains selected, if I really wanted to go in and modify this, of course you could come over and choose the direct selection tool, but better still is to double-click it again. When you double-click it again, you're isolated just to that object. And you can see that up here towards the top, that we're now inside of another group. And if I click on the mountains, we've isolated just that portion of the logo. Isolation mode is very similar to working with symbols inside of Flash. Of course, if you don't use Flash, that's not a very helpful reference. But nevertheless, you have the ability to drill down into specific components of a larger piece of artwork. To get back to where you were, you have a couple different options. You can step through step by step by clicking this back one level button. Notice right now I'm in the nested group, but if I click this button, I'm back to the original group. And of course I can click again to get back to the main document. Again, if you go ahead and double click, you enter the group. If you continue to double click on specific elements, you drill down further into those elements. If you want to go directly back to the document, you can do that simply by clicking on the document here within this breadcrumb structure. One thing that I do want to point out, new users sometimes will be confused by this structure. And what I mean by that is, they'll double click by accident. And in this case, they're in isolation mode for the overall grouped element. If they start creating additional artwork, thinking that they're within the document, they'll cause problems because they're really inside of this group. So when you're working with grouped objects and you're working in isolation mode, just be extra careful to be aware of where you are inside of the document. Make sure you're not drilled down into a group if your intention is to create artwork within the main document. Creating new documents inside of Illustrator is something that you'll be doing all the time when working inside of the program. That's why it's important to understand the options inside the new document dialog box. Let's go ahead and take a look at how we can create a new document. What you want to do is come up to the File menu, and under the File menu, you can choose New. The keyboard shortcut is Command-N here on the Macintosh. It would be Control-N on the Windows side. Once you choose the new command, the new document dialog box will open. First of all, you can name the new document. I'll call it My First Doc. This will be the file name of the document. And of course, if you leave it blank, you have the option of providing a name when you save the document, but you can save a little bit of time by filling in the name here inside this dialog box. Now, there's several different profiles that are available to you. Right now, we're looking at the print profile, but you'll notice that there's options for web, devices, video, and a few others. I'm going to go ahead and leave it set to print. Regardless of the profile, you have options for the number of artboards that you want to work with. And we'll talk about working with multiple artboards in just a bit. But here you can specify the number of artboards. You can also set the size of the document. You'll notice we have some fairly standard sizes here. We have letter, legal, tabloid, and some international standards as well. I'll leave it set to letter. You can specify the width and the height for the document. And you can also change the unit of measurement. Right now it's set to points, but if you prefer working in picas or inches, those options are available. If I go ahead and select inches, you'll notice everything is updated. Once you make a modification to the default values, you'll notice that the profile switches to custom. Now there are bleed options as well. A bleed is essentially values that control the width of the print area for items that extend beyond the artboard. If you're going to be working with a professional printer, you would ask them for the bleed values. Additionally, there are advanced options here. You'll notice that there's a color mode option. Because we selected the print profile, it automatically defaults the color mode to CMYK, which is the 4-color ink process used in professional printing. CMYK, of course, stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. There's also options for raster effects. When we talk about live effects inside of Illustrator, many of those are raster-based effects, which means they're based on pixels, and you have to decide how much resolution you want dedicated to those effects. Because you selected the print profile, the option is set to high. So let's go ahead and change the profile. You can change the profile by using this menu and selecting something else. Let's go ahead and choose something like web. When you select web, it sets up a new default size. It changes the default unit of measurement to pixels, because when you're working with graphics to be displayed on screen, you're typically measuring in pixels. Additionally, the color mode is set to RGB. The raster effects are set to screen or 72 ppi because you don't need as much resolution for content to appear nicely on screen. Whereas if you use something low like this for print, it really wouldn't print all that well. It would look somewhat pixelated. When you're working with an on-screen delivery profile like web or mobile devices, it's a good idea to align new objects to the pixel grid. This will ensure that your content lands on a whole value within the pixel grid to avoid any blurring when you export out the content. So once you're happy with these settings, you can come over and click OK. Once you click OK, the new document is created. Now that you have a thorough understanding of the new document dialog box, let's go ahead and create a new document and look at some of the things that you'll be seeing within a document inside of Illustrator. So let's come up to the File menu, and under the File menu, you can choose New. Inside the New Document dialog box, what I want to do here is set up some bleed values. The reason why I'm doing this is so you can see all of the potential lines around the artboard, so I can explain what those lines represent. So for our purposes, you want to come over and select this option right here, which will make all of the settings the same. Meaning, if you come into the top text field and you type in 20, you'll notice 20 is applied to the bottom left and right as well. So with that set up, go ahead and click OK. It creates the new document. Now, in order for us to see everything associated with this document in terms of potential guides, if you will, what I want you to do is come up to the View menu, and under the View menu, you can choose Show Print Tiling. So I'll explain exactly what we're looking at here with the new document in just a second. But first, I want you to take a look at the tab up here towards the top. This tab is giving you some important information. First of all, it's telling you the file name. Because I didn't provide a name within the new document dialog box and I haven't saved this document yet, it's set to untitled, in this case 7. It's also showing the current magnification, which right now is set to 76%. It's also displaying the color mode or the color space that I'm working with. In this case, it's CMYK. And then this option here is the preview mode. And there's a couple different preview modes. Right now we're in preview, but there's also outline overprint, and there's also pixel preview. If you're working with proof colors, that information will also show up here on this tab. So what are we looking at in terms of all of these lines with the document? First of all, you can't see all of the dashed lines because we see the artboard border. And what we want to do is turn that off. So if you come up to the View menu, under the View menu, you can choose Hide Artboards. When you do that, now you can see all of the dotted lines. So what do these dotted lines represent? The innermost set of lines represents the actual printable area. And this takes into account the printer's non-printable margins at the edge of the paper. It's controlled by the specifications set up in the Print Setup dialog box. This second set of dashed lines or dotted lines is the paper size. And then finally, we have this red line. The red line defines the bleed region, which we specified in the new document dialog box. Again, you would typically get these parameters from your print shop. They can be modified in the document setup dialog box and the print dialog box. For now, I want to turn the visibility of artboards back on. So we're going to come back to the View menu, and under the View menu, we can choose Show Artboards. Now, like I said in a previous movie, you're not limited to just one artboard per document. So in the next movie, what we'll do is take a look at how we can work with multiple artboards. A great feature inside of Adobe Illustrator is having the ability to work with multiple artboards. This gives you the ability to have different pieces of a campaign stored in a single document. I'm working with letterhead.ai, which is available inside the Chapter 1 folder. And here's a perfect example as to how and when and why you would want to use multiple artboards. Here we have some letterhead, an envelope, and a business card, and it's all stored within this one document. Notice that the artboards are different sizes, and they contain different names. If we come over to the Artboards panel, you can see that we have the business card artboard, we have the envelope artboard, and we have the letterhead artboard. If you double-click on any of these, you'll notice that that artboard takes up the majority of the space within the document window. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can work with multiple artboards inside of Illustrator. What I want you to do is come up to the File menu, and under the File menu, you can choose New. This will open up the New Document dialog box. For the profile, go ahead and set it to Print, and we can change the number of artboards to 4. When you set the number of artboards to something more than 1, you have the arrangement options available to you. You can set up a grid by row, a grid by column, you can arrange by row, or you can arrange by a single column. So there's a lot of different options here. I'll go ahead and leave the first option selected, which is grid by row. Because we only have 4 artboards, 2 columns makes sense, and you can also control the spacing between the artboards. Now, if you set up some bleed options, just be aware that that bleed will be applied to all 4 artboards. Individual artboards can't have individual bleed values. With that, go ahead and click OK. Once you click OK, the new document is created. So how can you control these artboards? Because based upon letterhead.ai, there was a lot of different things happening with these artboards in terms of sizing, spacing, and also naming. Well, let's come back to this document and take a look at how we can work with these artboards. First of all, you can open up the Artboards panel over here on the right-hand side. If you don't see the Artboards panel, you can come up to the Window menu, and under the Window menu, you can choose Artboards. So first of all, if you want to name the artboard, you would go ahead and double-click. By double-clicking, you can change the name of it, My Artboard. Go ahead and press Enter or Return to accept that. However, if you really want to control the artboards by changing the size or the position, or even create new or remove artboards, there's a great tool inside of Illustrator giving you the ability to do that. First of all, most of the options that I'm showing you now are available in a couple of different places. If you did want to delete an artboard or create a new artboard, notice that there's the New Artboard button and there's also the Delete Artboard button inside the Artboards panel. You also have the ability to change the stacking order. In this case, it doesn't really matter, but if you wanted this artboard to be moved down, you can click this button and it's moved down. As you click the artboards here in the Artboards panel, you'll notice they become selected. I'm going to go ahead and move this back up to the top. You can also select artboards by simply choosing the selection tool and clicking on a particular artboard. When you do that, you'll notice you get a highlight, a dark border around that artboard, and the selection is also reflected here in the Artboards panel. But let's go ahead and take a look at a useful tool for working with artboards, and that is the Artboard tool. With that selected, you'll notice you can click on each of the artboards and they become active, and you have a bounding box. So if you need to resize the artboard, you have that ability. If you want to move the artboard, you can do that. If you want to delete the artboard, you can do that here as well by clicking this little box with the X, and the artboard is removed. Also notice if you move the Artboard tool out here inside of the canvas, and the canvas is this gray area, you can store content in the canvas and it won't print as long as it doesn't intersect with an artboard. And the canvas inside of Illustrator is pretty big. If I start zooming out, you'll see how large the canvas actually is. This box that we're seeing here is the canvas, so you have a ton of room to work with. I'll go ahead and zoom back into this. If you want to create a new artboard with the Artboard tool, simply click and drag, and there's your artboard. There are additional properties available for the artboard with it selected with the Artboard tool. You can come up here towards the top and you can click this button. This button will open up the Artboard Options dialog box. Here you can name it, you can set the width and the height, and its XY coordinate relative to the canvas, and you can also set its reference point. You can specify the orientation. If you want to constrain proportions, you can do that as well. And there's also some additional display options for showing the center mark or crosshairs or video safe margins. So if you're creating a title for a video production, you can make sure that you're going to stay within the safe region of the video. So there are quite a few options inside of this dialog box. There are also several options inside the control panel, like naming the artboard, creating a new artboard, deleting the artboard, changing the orientation. You can also set the XY coordinate here and the width and the height. And there are also some additional options here for showing the center mark, the crosshairs, and the video safe areas. So a lot of the options in that dialog box are also available here in the control panel. If you want to duplicate the artboard, you can do that. Simply hold down the Alt key on Windows, Option on the Mac, click and drag, and you've duplicated the artboard. Now this can become incredibly helpful if you have artwork inside of the artboard. If you come over here to letterhead.ai, if you wanted to create another business card, maybe you have a different design that you want to share, what you can do is select that artboard. With the artboard selected, hold down the Alt key or the Option key, click and drag, and you'll notice you've duplicated it. At this point, you could come in and make minor modifications for a second version of that business card. So the ability to work with multiple artboards inside of Illustrator, as you can see, definitely has its advantages, and working with multiple artboards is pretty easy, especially with this artboard tool. In this movie, what I'd like to do is show you how you can use some of the Illustrator templates as a starting point for your projects. Now, I know a lot of graphic designers don't like the idea of templates, but some of these templates are incredibly useful, and they don't necessarily contain predefined artwork. So let's go ahead and take a look at these templates. You can access the templates by coming up to the File menu, and under the File menu, you can choose New from Template. What that will do is open up the New from Template dialog box. It'll put you into the templates directory, and you'll notice that there's several different categories for these templates. If we go ahead and open up Tech, you'll notice that there's several different template files. Now, you'll notice that the extension is .ait for Adobe Illustrator template. You're not opening up the template file, but rather creating a new document based on this template. So if we go ahead and select something like brochures and click New, it's going to go ahead and open up a new document. And as you look at it, you'll see that there's several different artboards. If I hold down the space bar to access the hand tool, I can click and drag to see all of the artboards. You probably won't use this particular file in your project, but what it does do is it begins to make you think about using Illustrator in a slightly different way. In this case, we have a multi-page document. Now, I'm not suggesting using Illustrator over InDesign, but for some smaller projects, you might find that Illustrator is the ideal solution. Like I said, because there's artwork inside of this template, it may not be something that you'll use, but there still are several useful templates available to you. Let me show you what I mean. If we come back to the File menu, under the File menu, we can choose New from Template again. It reopens the New from Template dialog box in the Templates directory. What I want you to do this time is come over to the Blank Templates directory. And inside the Blank Templates directory, there's a file called bannerads.ait. If you go ahead and select that and you click New, it creates a new document, and you can see all of these artboards. They're already predefined to industry standard banner ad sizes, 468 by 60, 728 by 90. So if you had a campaign you had to put together, this is incredibly helpful because you have all the artboards predefined to the appropriate dimensions. So I just want to quickly point out that the templates inside of Illustrator are useful, even if you're a seasoned graphic designer and you have no need for templates. As you can see, some of these blank templates can be terrific starting points. Saving a document inside of Illustrator is pretty much the same process in just about any application. But what I want to show you in this movie is how you can save metadata with your document to make it searchable, especially by programs like Adobe Bridge. So what I want you to do is come up to the File menu, and under the File menu, you can choose File Info. What this will do is open up a dialog box, and inside this dialog box, you'll notice that there's several different tabs. The tab I'm mostly concerned with for this particular document would be the Description tab. Obviously, something like the Camera Data tab doesn't have much value in this particular example. But the Description tab does contain a lot of useful options for adding metadata to this particular document. And like I said, by adding this metadata, you make this document more searchable by programs like Adobe Bridge. And this can be incredibly useful. Not only can you contain the document title and information about the author, but more importantly, you can provide keywords for this document. And this can be incredibly helpful. Just imagine if you work with clients day in and day out. Years go by, a client needs you to find a particular document and make a small modification to it. Well, you're probably not going to remember the actual file name, but if you could put some type of description inside of this dialog box, along with keywords, you increase your chances of finding this in programs like Bridge, so when you need to find it, you have more options for searchability. So that was the key takeaway for this movie, is that if you're going to save your documents, spend just a little bit of time by coming into this dialog box and adding some metadata. This metadata gets injected into an XML-based file, which gets attached to the headers of the .ai file. So it's part of the Illustrator document. I'm working with a document called infographic.ai, which is available inside the Chapter 2 folder. What we want to do in this chapter is look at some of the components of the Adobe Illustrator interface. In this movie, I want to point out a couple of unique features to macOS, and then I want to review how the panels behave inside of Illustrator. Now, if you're comfortable with other Creative Suite applications, you'll feel right at home inside of Illustrator, as the behavior for the majority of the panels is the same. So first of all, for those Mac-specific features, by default, Illustrator will show the application frame. If you don't like the application frame, you can go to the Window menu, and under the Window menu, you can deselect application frame. What that will do is make the document a free floating window, which is kind of the way most Mac applications behave. But by turning on the application frame, you essentially isolate Illustrator from everything else within the operating system. The behavior of the application frame makes Illustrator on the Mac side behave almost exactly the same as it does on the Windows side. For that purpose, I'm going to be recording this course with the application frame active. So that's the first Mac-only thing I wanted to point out. The other thing that I wanted to point out, which I'll mention over and over and over again, but anytime we need to go to the Preferences dialog box, here on the Mac side, you'll go to the Illustrator menu, and under the Illustrator menu, you'll choose Preferences. Now, on the Windows side, this Preferences command and the submenu is available under the Edit menu. So that kind of clears up Mac-only specific things for Illustrator. What I want to look at now is how the panels behave and operate inside of Illustrator. Now, the screen resolution that I'm recording at is a little bit smaller than what you're probably using Illustrator at. And because of that, some of my content is scrunched up a little bit. You'll notice that my Tools panel is being viewed in a 2-column view, which is kind of the way Illustrator would display tools back in its early days. But now, that sometimes takes up too much screen space. So oftentimes, people like to view this in a single-column view. And you can access that single-column view by clicking this little two-way arrow right here, also known as a chevron sign. If you click it, it collapses. A shortcut to that is just double-clicking this top bar. You'll notice you can toggle, you can expand it or collapse it by doing that. So that's the first thing. The other thing that I want to point out is the way that you can interact with panels. Now, by default, they're collapsed, and you'll notice the panels over here on the right are the panels that will give you additional options for whatever it is that you're working with inside of Illustrator. Now, if you're not familiar with what these little icons represent, you can hover your mouse over that icon and a tooltip will appear, and that tooltip will tell you what that panel represents. Additionally, you can click it, which will temporarily expand it. You can click it again to collapse it. Now, something else that you can do is click the little chevron signs. When you do that, you get the expanded view for the panels, and you'll notice that the panels are in what are called panel sets. There's several tabs docked together. Now, you have complete control over these panels. For example, if I wanted the color panel to be a free floating panel, well, you have that ability. Just click on the tab and drag it away from the docked structure. Let go of the mouse. Now it's a free floating panel. You can always restore it back to its original panel set. Again, grab the tab, click and drag, and place it into that structure. Now, in this case, Color Guide appears in front of Color. If you want to switch that back, simply click and drag, and you can change the sorting order of those tabs. If you go ahead and collapse that again, so you're just looking at the icons, some new users for Illustrator may prefer a larger view, but not quite as large as the expanded view. If you place your cursor in between the document window and the actual panel pane, if you click and drag to the left, you'll notice not only do you see icons, but you also see labels now. So it's giving you a little bit more information. Additionally, if you want to access a particular panel and you don't see it available here, you can always go to the Window menu, and under the Window menu, you can choose whatever panel it is that you're looking for. Now, if you select a panel that's currently collapsed, for example, the Color panel, by selecting the Color panel from the Window menu, all you're going to do is expand it. Likewise, if it's expanded and you go to the Window menu and choose Color, it will just collapse it. So you have a lot of options in terms of how you can work with panels inside of Illustrator, and I'm sure I didn't cover all of the options, but those certainly are the most important options. There's one additional panel that I want to point out, and that's located up here towards the top. This is called the Control Panel, and it's a unique panel inside of Illustrator that we're going to explore in much greater detail in the next movie. As I mentioned towards the end of the last movie, there's a very important component in the Illustrator interface called the Control Panel, and it's located up here towards the top. Now, it's not the very top, this is the application bar, but just underneath it, this horizontal panel, it's called the Control Panel. Now, you may hear some people refer to it as the Options bar, and I'm pretty sure I've done that in the past, and that's because this same panel exists within other Creative Suite applications like Photoshop, and in those programs, it's referred to as the Options bar. But nevertheless, this panel is critically important because it changes based upon what you have selected and what you're working with inside of the document. You'll notice right now I have the selection tool highlighted. If I come into the document and I make a selection, for example, if I click right here, I can see inside the control panel that this is a group. If I come over here and click on this ribbon, I can see that this is a path. Furthermore, I get options for modifying that path. Not only am I getting feedback about its current fill color, but I have the option of opening up this panel and choosing a completely different fill color. If I wanted to apply a stroke, all you have to do is click on this button to access the swatches panel for strokes. Go ahead and choose a color, and then you can modify the stroke weight. You can modify the width profile. You can modify the brush definition, the opacity. All these options are available in the control panel. And the control panel is intelligent. It will display the most important options on the left, and as it progresses through on the right-hand side, the options are considered less and less important, at least based upon the Adobe engineers. And you can customize this panel. In the far right-hand side, there's a button that gives you a menu of all the different options that can appear in the control panel. Now, the options that you're seeing now may not include all these that are selected. Your screen resolution will ultimately dictate how many of these options you see. As I record this, my screen resolution is a little bit smaller, so I'm not seeing as many options as you probably are on your screen. You also have the ability to dock the control panel down towards the bottom. Go ahead and select the Dock to Bottom command, and you'll notice it's now available down below. For the purposes of this course, I'm going to leave it set to its default top position. So I'm going to come back to this menu, and I'm going to choose Dock to Top. Now, if for some reason you don't see the control panel is available through the window menu. All you have to do is go to the window menu, and under the window menu, you can choose Control. So the control panel, like I said, is critically important because it changes based upon the selected object within the document. And not only do you get feedback about its current appearance properties, you also have the ability to change those appearance properties. As we talk about the interface inside of Illustrator, I thought it would be important to point out some of the built-in tools that will help you create content inside the program. Those tools that I'm talking about are the rulers and the guides. Now, if you work with other Adobe products, you probably think you have a handle on how to work with rulers and guides. And for the most part, you probably do. But there are some unique characteristics associated with these two tools inside of Illustrator, so it's probably worth your time to watch this movie. You'll notice I'm working with a document called letterhead.ai, which is available inside the Chapter 2 folder. And this document has multiple artboards, and it just so happens that I used the artboard tool to reposition some of the artboards. What that ended up doing is changing the 0,0 reference point of the rulers. Let me show you what I mean. If you come up to the View menu, under the View menu, you can choose Rulers, then you can choose Show Rulers. When you do that, rulers will appear along the top and left side of the document window. Now, the 0,0 reference point, you'll notice right now, starts over here, kind of in the inner quarter of the document. If you're trying to make a measurement, that can be pretty difficult. So what you want to do is reset the 0,0 point. To do that, you want to place your cursor in between the horizontal and vertical guides. Then simply click and drag, and when you do, you have the ability to reset that 0, 0 point. Just move the crosshair to the top left-hand corner of the artboard. In fact, you'll kind of feel it snap into place there. And when you let go of the mouse, you'll notice that the 0, 0 points are updated. Now, there is one problem with this, especially when working with multiple artboards. If you come over to the business card and select the logo, it's very difficult to use the ruler to come up with a measurement. And that's because the 0, 0 point is set to the top left-hand corner of this main artboard. So what you can do is come up to the View menu, and under the View menu, you can choose Rulers, and from there, you can choose Change to Artboard Rulers. Once you do that, you'll notice that the 0, 0 point changes based upon the active artboard, in this case, the business card. If I come over here and make a selection within the envelope, if you take a look on the left-hand side, you'll see the 0 point move down. Again, if I select something here in the letterhead, you'll notice that the 0, 0 point is the top left-hand corner of this artboard. Another nice thing about the rulers, if you decide that you need to zoom in for any reason, the tick marks are updated, so they get more sensitive or less sensitive based upon your magnification. When you're working with rulers, oftentimes you're going to be working with guides as well. To create a guide, all you have to do is place your cursor within a ruler, either the horizontal or vertical ruler, and simply click and drag out a guide. As you click and drag, if you decided that you really wanted the opposite guide, meaning in this case I have a horizontal guide but I want a vertical guide, all you have to do is hold down the Option key on the Mac, Alt on Windows, and you'll notice it flips around. And that's really a toggle. So once you release the key, it returns back to its original orientation. So once you let go of the mouse, the guide's in place. Now that's not to say that you can't create a vertical guide by simply clicking in the ruler vertically and dragging. You certainly can. So now you have two guides. If you decide that you want to move the guide, you have that ability. Simply mouse over the guide and click and drag. Now when you're dragging the guide, what's nice is you get this heads-up display telling you exactly where you're going to be positioning this guide. Once you have the guides positioned where you want them, you may want to lock them down so they can't be moved by accident. All you have to do is go to the View menu, and from the View menu, you can choose Guides, then you can choose Lock Guides. Another thing that you can do is you can temporarily turn off the visibility of a guide. Again, come up to the View menu, and from there you can choose Guides, and then you can choose Hide Guides. The keyboard shortcut is Command semicolon or Control semicolon on Windows, and it acts as a toggle. So if they're not visible, Command semicolon or Control semicolon will turn them back on, and if they're on, it will turn them off. A nice feature inside of Illustrator gives you the ability to make a guide out of any path. If you come over and choose the Rectangle tool, with the Rectangle tool, go ahead and select some type of stroke color, and draw a square or a rectangle here within this document. Now, with it selected, you can come up to the View menu, and from the View menu, you can choose Guides, then you can choose Make Guides. And now that shape is a guide. And this is incredibly powerful, to have the ability to create a guide from literally any shape. Now, you may decide at some point that you no longer want that shape to be treated as a guide. Well, what you can do is you can release it. In order for you to release it, though, you need to make sure that the guides are not locked. So again, under the View menu, select Guides, and then deselect Lock Guides. At that point, you can go ahead and select that shape, which is now a guide, come back to the View menu, select Guides, and then you can choose Release Guides. And you'll notice it's returned back to a path. Finally, if you want to get rid of the guides, you can do that by coming up to the View menu, and under the View menu, you can choose Guides, then you can choose Clear Guides. There's two more things I want to show you. First of all, you can change the unit of measurement for the ruler by right-clicking or control-clicking on one of the rulers, and then selecting that unit of measurement from this contextual menu. I'll go ahead and select inches, and you'll notice it's updated, and is now displaying the ruler as inches. The last thing that I want to point out, if you click and drag out a guide, you'll notice that the guide spans across all artboards. and you may not want that to happen. I'm going to go ahead and undo this. To avoid that, what you want to do is come over and highlight the artboard tool, select the artboard that you want to create a guide for, then click and drag out a guide, and you'll notice it's unique to that artboard. If you come over and highlight the selection tool, it's preserved that way as well, so it doesn't span across multiple artboards. So guides and rulers ultimately will give you the ability to position your content precisely where you want it. Since we're talking about different ways that you can position content inside of Illustrator and some of the tools that are built into the program to help facilitate that, I want to point out a couple of features associated with working with guides, and I also want to introduce you to the grid inside of Illustrator. So I'm still working with that same document, letterhead.ai. You'll notice I'm zoomed in a little bit so we can see this logo a little bit more clearly. Here we have a guide, and I'll just click and drag it up a little bit. By default, when you grab an object, if you click and drag, you can have it snap to the guide as long as your cursor is intersecting with that guide. So you'll notice that if I select just the bottom right edge here, if the bottom right edge and the cursor is on top of the guide, it snaps into place. Now that option is something called snap to point. If you come up to the View menu, under the View menu, you'll notice that Snap to Point is selected. If you deselect that, the object will then snap to the guide independently of the cursor. So if we click and drag and place this down towards the guide, you'll notice it snaps into place. And it'll snap into place in different sections of the image. So here's the center point, here's the top of it. All of these areas, the object is snapping to the guide. So those two options can be incredibly helpful. Sometimes snap to point is helpful, other times it's not, but those are your two options for snapping your artwork to guides. Now, not only do you have guides and rulers to help you position your content, you also have something called a grid. If you come up to the View menu, under the View menu, you can choose Show Grid. If you go ahead and select Show Grid, it looks like there's graph paper behind all of your artwork. Now, you can customize this grid, and you can customize the guides. What you need to do is either not have anything selected and click the Preferences button here in the Control panel, or on the Macintosh, you can come over to the Illustrator menu and choose Preferences, and from Preferences, you can choose Guides and Grid. If you're on the Windows side, you would go to the Edit menu, and you would choose Preferences, Guides, and Grid. And inside this dialog box, notice you can change the color of the guides, you can change the style from lines to dots, and the grid has a lot of customization features as well. Again, you could use lines or dots. You can also customize the color, and you can essentially change the overall size of these grid boxes by changing the grid every text field and also the subdivisions text field. If you go ahead and click OK, those changes, if you made any, will take effect. Now, one other thing that you can do is come up to the View menu, and under the View menu, you can choose Snap to Grid. What that means is when you select an object and drag it around, it'll snap to all these intersecting grid lines. So that can be incredibly helpful. One thing that some designers like to do is snap to the grid, but they don't necessarily want to see the grid. Well, that's okay. If you come back to the View menu, and under the View menu, you choose Hide Grid, as long as Snap to Grid is still selected, you'll still get that behavior as you drag the object around within the document. So working with the guides and customizing the guides and using the grid when necessary can really help you position your content within your Illustrator documents. I'm working with a document called smartguides.ai, which is available inside the Chapter 2 folder. I just wanted to quickly point out how smart guides work and what benefits they can provide you when working inside the program. So what I have here are two squares, and I want to point out what a smart guide is. We've seen smart guides, but I didn't explicitly point them out, at least not until this point. If you mouse over the object, you'll notice you get some information. For example, if you mouse over the edge of the path, you get a little piece of text that appears telling you that you're on a path. Furthermore, if you click to select the object and decide that you want to move it, As you move it, you get these smart guides giving you some readout displays about the location of where you're going to be placing this object. In fact, if you drag it over here towards the left, once the left edge of the object on the right matches up with the right edge of the object on the left, you can see that a smart guide appears, and it kind of snaps into place here. If I continue to drag, I'll get a smart guide to position at the center point. So there's a lot of information that Illustrator is providing you with as you move content around. Now, depending upon your needs, you may need to customize the information that the smart guides are relaying. And if that's the case, you can click away from any object, and without anything selected within the document, in the control panel, you can come over and choose preferences. Now, inside the preferences dialog box, you want to come over to smart guides, and inside of the smart guides section, you can change the color of the smart guides. You can determine what options it reveals as you drag content or move content. For example, we were getting measurement labels. If you didn't want those, you could deselect those. If you wanted the transform tools, you could have those appear. You can also set up construction guides, which will automatically create guides at specific angles and divide them according to these values you plug in here. There's also a snapping tolerance, which is essentially the sensitivity of the snapping behavior when you have these smart guides appear. So those are the options you have for customizing smart guides if necessary. I'm going to go ahead and click cancel. Finally, if you don't feel that you need to use smart guides, you can turn them off. You can come up to the view menu, and under the view menu, simply choose smart guides. The keyboard shortcut is Command U. It would be Control U on Windows. Once you deselect the smart guides, as you click and drag the object around, you'll notice you're not getting any of that readout information. In all honesty, I do work with smart guides quite a bit, so I'm going to leave them turned on for this course. So let's just come back to the view menu, and under the view menu, we can choose smart guides again to turn them on. So we looked at guides and smart guides and rulers and all these tools that help you position content. One of the most basic commands inside of Illustrator when it comes to positioning content would be the align command, or working with the align panel. The align panel gives you the ability to make sure that content is evenly spaced. You want to make sure that the relationship in terms of spacing between your different elements is accurate, and the align panel gives you that ability. For example, I'm working with this document called badges.ai, which is available inside the Chapter 2 folder. If we wanted all of these badges to be aligned on the same horizontal plane, the align panel would give us that ability. What if we wanted equal space horizontally between each of these elements? Again, the align panel would be the tool to use inside of Illustrator to achieve that. So what we need to do is open the align panel. You can open the align panel by going to the window menu, and under the window menu, you can choose align. Now, the align panel has all these little icons, and what's nice about these icons is, for the most part, they're self-explanatory in terms of giving you an idea as to how you're about to align or distribute these objects. And if you don't know what the little icons represent, all you have to do is hover over the icon, and a tooltip will tell you what it will do. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to make sure that all of these badges are aligned on the same horizontal plane. So in order for us to do that, we need to select all of them. And the quickest and easiest way to do that is to click and drag a marquee around all of these objects. Now, with all of them selected, you can choose how you want them to be aligned. In this case, we're going to select vertical align center. So we're going to align them horizontally based upon their vertical center point. So if you go ahead and click that, you can see now that they're all aligned. But you can see that the spacing between them really isn't the best. And so what we can do is use the Distribute Objects section. And the Distribute Objects section will take the first object and the last object and all the objects in between and evenly space them. But it won't move the first object or the last object. So it's only going to move the content in between them to get this space to appear evenly. If you wanted this to span a greater distance, you would move either the first or last object over a little bit. Hopefully that makes sense. But with all of them selected, what you can do is come over and click this button here, which is horizontal distribute center. When you do that, you'll notice now they're evenly spaced horizontally. Even though they're evenly spaced horizontally, the distance between them vertically is equal. So it's a little bit confusing in terms of the terminology that they use, but as you use this align panel, it will make more and more sense. But really, this align panel is the quickest and easiest way to align multiple objects within your Illustrator documents. I'm working with a document called logo.ai, which is available in the Chapter 2 folder. What I'd like to do in this movie is show you a helpful but sometimes confusing feature inside of Illustrator, especially for new users. What I'd like to do is select one of the leaves within this logo. Now, if you click on it, you'll notice it's a part of a group. So if you double click, you'll enter isolation mode, and at that point, you'll have the ability to select individual leaves. Now, when you're working inside of Illustrator, on occasion this bounding box is somewhat distracting. A quick, easy solution for that is to come over and highlight the direct selection tool. When you do that, you just see the vector points highlighted. Now, you have the ability to make any modifications that you want to this selected object. However, again, sometimes this can be a distraction, and if that's the case, you can come up to the View menu, and under the View menu, you'll notice that there's an option called Hide Edges. Now, when you select that option, something somewhat confusing happens. It does what you asked it to do. It's hiding the edges. But as a new user, it may be misleading in terms of understanding what is and what isn't selected. Now, we know it's selected because we just clicked on it and we selected Hide Edges. But we also know it's selected because if we look at the control panel, we can see that it reads Path and we can see the fill color. If you want to make a modification to this, you can. I can come over here and change the color to something else completely, and you'll notice it's updated. So it is selected even though you're not aware of it. Furthermore, if we come over here and select something else, you get that temporary highlight around the object, but once you mouse away from it, it doesn't look like it's selected anymore. But again, it is. If we come over and choose a different color, you'll notice that the artwork is updated. So it can be helpful if you find that the edges are distracting, but it can be confusing if you're not aware that Hide Edges is turned on. And I bring this up especially for Mac users. If you come over to the View menu, you'll notice that the keyboard shortcut is Command H. And many Mac users will use Command H to hide the current application that they're in. So there can be times inside of Illustrator, especially on the Mac, where you have Hide Edges enabled, but you don't realize it. So you may come over and make a selection and start scratching your head thinking that you selected it, but it doesn't appear selected. When in reality, it is selected. You just have the Hide Edges command active. So if I turn Show Edges on, you'll notice now when you make a selection, it does in fact show those edges. So that's a fairly basic option inside of Illustrator, but I did want to point out what it does for you inside the program, but also how it can be a potential pitfall if you're not aware that Hide Edges is enabled. In this movie, I want to show you a feature that can be incredibly helpful when trying to look at content and possibly select and manipulate content. I'm working with this document called postcard.ai, which is available inside the Chapter 2 folder. If we take a look at this postcard, we know that we can always come in and mouse over an object, and in this case, if we wanted to manipulate a particular object, let's say this logo, we can double click it. And when you double click it, you enter isolation mode, which is to say this logo is now isolated from everything else within the document. And certainly that can be incredibly helpful when trying to change the appearance of certain elements within that object. However, you may run into other situations where you need to see a lot less detail. Maybe when you're working with a design, all of the detail will essentially get in the way and cloud your ability to make selections or minor adjustments. Well, fortunately, inside of Illustrator, there's a couple different views available to you. Under the View menu, you can choose Outline. When you select Outline, you'll notice that we're seeing all of the outlines for the paths and any text blocks that we have. We can see the 2 or 3 or 4 text blocks that we have, and then we have all of these path outlines. If you have a bitmap, you'll notice that the bitmap completely disappears because there's no vector information within a bitmap. Additionally, up here towards the top, you get the preview mode to appear in the tab of the document. In this case, we're working in outline view. You can toggle between outline and what's called preview mode by using the keyboard shortcut Command Y. It would be Control Y on Windows. So what preview is trying to do is it's trying to give you the best representation of what this content will look like when it prints. Or of course, if you're working with on-screen graphics, preview is essentially what the content will look like if you export it out as a image-based file format like PNG, GIF, or JPEG. So the key here is to toggle Command Y or Control Y on Windows. It just gives you the ability to look at the paths and text blocks within your document. And again, this can be helpful when trying to make precise selections or small modifications to small details within your document. I'm still working with postcard.ai. This file is available in the Chapter 2 folder. Throughout this course, you may have watched me zoom into certain portions of a document and zoom out. And what I'd like to do in this particular movie is show you exactly how you can do that. There's several different techniques for navigating a document, and I'm sure I'm not going to show you all of them, but I will show you probably the most useful and the most commonly used techniques for navigating a document. First of all, if you want to increase the magnification or decrease the magnification of the document, you can always go up to the View menu, and under the View menu, you'll notice that there's Zoom In and Zoom Out. There's associated keyboard shortcuts with that of Command plus, that would be Control plus on the Windows side, and Command minus or Control minus on the Windows side. If you go ahead and choose something like Zoom Out, you'll notice that you zoom out of the document. You get a readout up here towards the top of the document window of your current magnification, and that is also available down here in the bottom left-hand side of the document window. You'll also notice that there's a couple other options under the View menu. You can choose Fit Artboard in Window, which will fit the artboard in the available space. Under the View menu, there's also Fit All in Window. In this case, nothing different will really happen because we don't have anything outside of the artboard. But if we did, it would fit within the available space for the window. And then we also have Actual Size, which will set it to 100%. Now, if you want to zoom into the document, you can do that by using the Zoom tool, or you can use this drop-down menu that's available here. You can go ahead and select a specific percentage for the magnification, or you can choose Fit on Screen. So if I go ahead and set it to 150%, it zooms to 150%. But there's also the Zoom tool. The Zoom tool, Z is the keyboard shortcut to access it, gives you the ability to click and zoom to a particular area. If you want to continue to zoom in, just continue clicking in that area. You can zoom out by holding down the Alt key on Windows, Option on the Mac. You'll notice that the little plus sign inside the magnifying glass icon turns into a minus sign. If you click, you start to zoom out. Now you can also zoom into a specific area at a much larger magnification than you would by simply clicking if you just click and drag a marquee. Notice I've just dragged a marquee around the logo, so now essentially everything that was in that marquee is available within the document window. So that beats clicking a bunch of times. If you want to zoom out, again, you can go ahead and click the Zoom tool with the Option key or the Alt key held down on the spacebar. Now, a common problem, or a common thing that you may want to do once you're zoomed in, is move to a different location within the document. For example, we're zoomed in here at 300%, and I really want to take a look at the top left-hand corner of the postcard. So traditionally what you'd probably do is zoom out a bunch of times until you can see the entire postcard, then zoom in a bunch of times to that specific location that you wanted to magnify. There's no need to do that. You can actually come over here and choose the Hand tool. What the Hand tool will do is not move artwork, but rather move the entire canvas. So now I'm just moving all of the content, the canvas, as I'm magnified, giving me the ability to get to a different location without changing the magnification. Now you don't have to come over here and choose the Hand tool explicitly. If you have the Zoom tool highlighted, you can always hold down the space bar on your keyboard to temporarily toggle to the hand tool, giving you the ability to move the canvas around. Now, a common keyboard shortcut, of course, to access the magnification or zoom tool if you have a different tool selected. So if we come over here and highlight the selection tool, if you want to zoom in, you can hold down the space bar and the command key. That would be space bar control key on the Windows side, and you'll notice that you temporarily activate the zoom tool. Now on the Mac, you're probably going to change the order in which you press those keys on your keyboard, and it will work if you hold down the command key first, then the space bar, but you'll also activate Spotlight. That's a keyboard shortcut for the operating system. So you'll still get the zoom tool, but you'll also get this Spotlight text field to pop up, which quite honestly can be kind of annoying. But nevertheless, I did want to point that out. And if you wanted to zoom out, you can use the keyboard shortcut Space Command Option on the Mac. That would be Space Control Alt on the Windows side, and you temporarily activate the zoom out tool. So those are a couple different ways that you can navigate your document. The last way that I want to show you is the Navigator panel. If you come up to the Window menu, under the Window menu, you can choose Navigator. You'll get a little Navigator panel here. What you can do is zoom in and zoom out by using this slider. And as you slide, you're essentially viewing the content within this red box. So as you drag the slider to the right, you'll notice that the red box gets tighter around your artwork. And if you place your cursor inside of the Navigator panel, you can click and drag that red box around, which is yet another way to navigate your document. You can also type in a percentage value here if you know you want to magnify to a certain percentage. So those are your options for navigating your documents inside of Illustrator. You have the zoom tool and the hand tool, and you also have several different options through menu commands and keyboard shortcuts to zoom in and out of the document. The default working with postcard.ai inside of Illustrator is available in the Chapter 2 folder. Immediate commands throughout this course you may have otherwise would zoom in separate portions of the document and zoom out. And what I'm working with the document called Rafting Movie is show you exactly how you can do that. There's several different techniques. What I'd like you to do is come over and highlight the selection tool, and I'm sure I'm not going to show you all of them, but I will show you probably the most useful. If you come over and click inside of this piece of artwork, you'll notice that the selection becomes active. First of all, you have an active selection, you have a bounding box around the content of the document. In the bounding box, you can always go up to the View menu, and under the View menu, you'll notice that there's zoom in and zoom out. There's associated keyboard shortcuts with that. For example, if you want to increase the height on the Windows side, click and drag up, minus, or if you want to reduce Control minus on the Windows side. Down. If you go ahead and choose something like zoom out, you'll notice that you zoom out of the document, increase it, or you get a readout up here towards the top of the document window. If you want to change both the width and the height, what you can do is also available down here in the bottom left-hand side of the document window. And you'll notice you'll also notice that there's a couple other options under the View menu. Opposite corner, you can choose is essentially artboard window down, which will fit the artboard. So in this case, the bottom left-hand corner under the View menu, there's also fit all and window. In this case, nothing different will really happen. Now, you probably want to constrain its proportions. You don't want it to look like this. It would fit within the available space. So what you can do is hold down the Shift key, and then we also have actual size, which will set it to proportions. And you can scale it down. Now, if you want to zoom into the document, you can do that by and the same is true for any one of the resize handles. Or if you grab one of this drop-down menu that's available resize handles, whether it be on the right or left side, or the top or the bottom, or if you click and drag and hold down the Shift key, you'll constrain the proportions of the artwork. But there's also the zoom if you move your cursor outside one of the keyboard shortcut handles to access it, you'll get a two-way arrow, which is an indicator that if you click and drag a particular area, you'll rotate. If you want to continue to zoom the center point, continue clicking in that center. And what's nice about holding down, if you have Smart Guides turned on, you get a little heads-up display giving you the readout in terms of how many degrees you're rotating to a minus sign. So if you want to rotate it 45 degrees. Now you can also zoom into a specific area with this at a much larger magnification than you would by simply clicking. If you just click the ability to resize and rotate your artwork, just drag the marquee around the logo into Illustrator. And now essentially, anytime you select everything that was in that artwork is available within the document window, and you have the ability clicking a bunch to manipulate those properties. Zoom out again. You can go ahead and click the zoom tool with the Option key or the Alt key held down on the spacebar. Now, a common problem, or a common thing that you may want to do once you're zoomed in, is move to a different location within the document. For example, we're zoomed in here at 300%, and I really want to take a look at the top left-hand corner of the postcard. So traditionally what you'd probably do is zoom out a bunch of times until you can see the entire postcard, then zoom in a bunch of times to that specific location that you wanted to magnify. There's no need to do that. You can actually come over here and choose the hand tool. What the hand tool will do is not move artwork, but rather move the entire canvas. So now I'm just moving all of the content, the canvas, as I'm magnified, giving me the ability to get to a different location without changing the magnification. Now you don't have to come over here and choose the hand tool explicitly. If you have the zoom tool highlighted, you can always hold down the space bar on your keyboard to temporarily toggle to the hand tool, giving you the ability to move the canvas around. Now a common keyboard shortcut, of course, to access the magnification or zoom tool if you have a different tool selected. So if we come over here and highlight the selection tool, if you want to zoom in, you can hold down the space bar and the command key. That would be space bar control key on the Windows side, and you'll notice that you temporarily activate the zoom tool. Now on the Mac, you're probably going to change the order in which you press those keys on your keyboard, and it will work if you hold down the command key first, then the space bar, but you'll also activate Spotlight. That's a keyboard shortcut for the operating system. So you'll still get the zoom tool, but you'll also get this Spotlight text field to pop up, which quite honestly can be kind of annoying. But nevertheless, I did want to point that out. And if you wanted to zoom out, you can use the keyboard shortcut Space Command Option on the Mac. That would be Space Control Alt on the Windows side, and you temporarily activate the zoom out tool. So those are a couple different ways that you can navigate your document. The last way that I want to show you is the Navigator panel. If you come up to the Window menu, under the Window menu, you can choose Navigator. You'll get a little Navigator panel here. What you can do is zoom in and zoom out by using this slider. And as you slide, you're essentially viewing the content within this red box. So as you drag the slider to the right, you'll notice that the red box gets tighter around your artwork. And if you place your cursor inside of the Navigator panel, you can click and drag that red box around, which is yet another way to navigate your document. You can also type in a percentage value here if you know you want to magnify to a certain percentage. So those are your options for navigating your documents inside of Illustrator. You have the zoom tool and the hand tool, and you also have several different options through menu commands and keyboard shortcuts to zoom in and out of the document. When you're working inside of Illustrator, as you begin to work more and more with the program, you'll find that you work with certain panels more than other panels. If that's the case, and if you find that you're configuring Illustrator to best suit your working habits, it's probably worth taking a look at something called workspaces. Now, the default workspace inside of Illustrator is called Essentials. Up here in the top right-hand corner, you'll find a menu, which currently reads Essentials, but you'll notice that there's all sorts of other options here. Basically, what these options will do is reconfigure the interface to display the panels and options that are suited to these particular disciplines. For example, if you're working with web graphics, if you select Web, you'll notice that the interface changes to give you the options and panels that web designers would use most often. If you come up to the workspace area and you choose something like typography, you'll notice yet again it changes to give you panels that make sense for working with type, like the character panel, the character styles panel, etc. So, like I said, if you work inside of Illustrator quite a bit and you find that you customize the interface, meaning you have your own set of panels that you have open and that's the way that you like to work, you may consider saving a workspace. Let's just say, for example, we decided to come over to the Window menu, and under the Window menu, we wanted to use something like the Transform panel. The Transform panel opens. If we decide that we use this a lot and we want it docked over here towards the right, we can go ahead and drag this whole panel set. I'm going to dock it right here so those three icons now appear, giving you single-click access to all of those panels. So if you customize this, up in the top right-hand corner, you can choose New Workspace. If you select New Workspace, you can go ahead and name it. I'll call it Matt's Workspace. Then you can go ahead and click OK. Once you click OK, if someone else uses the computer, or if you're working on a different project and you find that you're working in a different workspace, you can always move between the workspaces by selecting them here, but you can always recall that saved workspace. You'll notice it's right up here towards the top. If you go ahead and select that, it's reconfigured to that saved workspace. Now, like I said, for the majority of people, Essentials is just fine, and as a new Illustrator user, you'll probably find that Essentials suits your needs. If you do find that you have customized the interface, but not for any particular reason, you were just working and you found that you had to open and close certain panels, and you really want to get back to the way that the Essentials workspace is configured by default. So let's say I come over here and close this panel, and I drag this panel over here and close it, and I end up docking this one over here to the left, and I make a real mess of the interface. You can always reset a workspace, again, by coming up to the top right-hand corner and choosing Reset, in this case, Essentials, and it's reset to the default layout. Now, if you configure multiple workspaces, which is not uncommon, a lot of times I'll create different workspaces for different projects. If I find that I'm done with a project, I may no longer need that workspace. If you want to remove a workspace, in this menu, you can choose Manage Workspaces. It'll open up a dialog box. Here you have the ability to change the name. You also have the ability to create a new workspace and name it, and you can also delete the workspace. If I go ahead and click the Delete button, the workspace is removed. If you click OK, you'll notice it's no longer available in this menu. So again, workspaces can help you save time by configuring Illustrator's interface with the panels and options that you need, saving them as a workspace, giving you the ability to recall it at any time.